The village of Lalibella was dying. And that is when the rumours started. They began with a priest at the church of St. George. It was early on a Sunday, and the morning had not yet turned into one of those hot baking days that followed one another relentlessly week after week. The bell at the entrance to the church of St. George began to ring. The priest stood on the steps in the bright yellow robe, his crown of black and gold on his head, and the brass cross of St. George held stiffly in his hand like a staff. The people of the village wrapped their galabayas around them, the women covering their heads, and ran with their children towards the church. Something important had happened. That bell had not rung for many years. It was insistent, urgent, calling them all to gather together and listen. Mariam ran too. She saw the priest standing alone and still. He looked like a golden angel in the early morning sun, and she knew that this was going to be the most important day in the 8 years of her life. The bell stopped ringing, and the priest began to speak. He spoke of a holy vision he had seen. St. George had appeared to him with a message from God for the people of Lalibella. The vision had been so bright he had fallen to the ground trembling. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they visualized the snorting horse and the blinding light of St. George bringing God's message to him. "This famine has been sent by God to test your faith," continued the priest. "Gather the children of Lalibella and send them to Addis Ababa, where the holy priests and good people await them with open arms. If they stay here, they will all die. Their salvation lies in Addis Ababa, a city of great wealth and riches." All day the people talked about the priest's vision. Some told of dreams they had had during the night, of tables piled high with food. Others told of cattle and goats walking in wide streets of Addis, looking sleek and healthy. They spoke of fat, smiling people, eager to share their abundance with the children of Lalibella. And so the stories grew, until by dusk there was not a person who did not know someone who had had a similar message from God. By nightfall they were talking about the miracle of St. George, and by the time the priest returned to bless them and to hear their decision, their faith in God and the miracle he had sent had grown so strong that there was not one who resisted. Over the next few days the children were loaded onto trucks and driven the hundreds of miles to the city of Addis. Mariam too was bundled onto a truck, but in the frenzy of activity became separated from her brothers and sisters. The priests in their embroidered finery and their burnished crosses held high personally blessed each child by sprinkling holy water over their heads. The children believed in the miracle too, and caught up in the religious fervour, their gaunt eyes shone with expectation. 2 days later, the trucks disgorged their human cargo and disappeared from sight. Addis was a city of desperation. The homeless and the hungry lined the streets, some sitting apathetically leaning against the city walls with their dirty shawls draped over their heads, hiding their ragged bodies from sight. Others lay on the pavements, huddled under filthy bundles of cloth, oblivious of the mass of humanity walking past them. Sometimes a limp hand protruded from the heap, identifying it as a human being. No one noticed, no one cared. The lepers thrust their fingerless hands up to passing cars, tapping on the glass with their stumps, hoping to shock the drivers into parting with a birr or two. Men sliding on their backsides on the road held up legs with feet eaten away by leprosy, pleading for help with their eyes. Women with infants tugging at their dried-up breasts motioned with their fingers cupped to their lips that they were hungry. Those with food in their bellies turned their eyes from the beseeching misery all around them. The children were the hardest to ignore. Sometimes they followed closely, tugging gently at the sleeve of someone whose eyes had not been averted quickly enough. Most of the time they didn't have the energy to clap their hands or sing a pretty song at the open window of a car. Mostly they lay like puppies in a soft heap on top of one another, limbs entwined, eyes closed, not feeling the hard pavement under their wasted bodies, drifting in and out of their dreams. When the rain began to fall, as it did on most afternoons, and the roads turned to rivers, they covered themselves with thin plastic and slept on. There was no room in Addis for the children of Lalibella. They simply joined the throngs of the hungry. The glisten of hope had long since faded into dull resignation. Too many to feed, too many to love. At first, Miriam walked wide-eyed and bewildered along the streets, teeming with cars, more people than she had ever seen, and thin herds of goats. She followed some of the children who had been in the truck, but soon lost them in the crowd. Hunger had drained her of all energy. She felt tired and could hear the faint sound of a bell clanging deep inside her head. She sat down. In front of her was a shop decorated with beautiful carpets. In the corner was a display of crosses, like the ones in the churches. There were paintings too. There was one of St. George with a fiery dragon lying underneath his white horse, with his sword deeply embedded in the dragon's throat. And in the corner of the painting was the young girl whose life had been spared. Miriam sat looking at the painting for a long time. For the first time since the day of the miracle, she felt calm and contented. The girl in the painting was pretty, but she didn't look very happy at having been spared. Perhaps she was too busy watching the dragon being killed. Maybe she smiled later. As Miriam watched, it seemed to her that the girl's mouth moved. She put her hand up and touched the shop window. The painted mouth moved again. The girl was smiling. She reached up and pressed her face against the glass. A fine mist floated around Miriam. The girl faded in and out of her vision, and in the distance she heard the sound of galloping hooves. They grew louder until she could feel the sound reverberate in her breast. She looked up. The white horse of St. George snorted and rose up above her, kicking his legs high into the air. She could feel his hot breath as his hooves touched the earth again. Then she felt St. George's strong arms enfold her and lift her up onto his white horse. She felt the muscles of the animal ripple beneath her as she nestled in the warm space between St. George and the saddle. The mist was very thick now, and she couldn't see the girl smile any more. She closed her eyes. No more suffering, no more hunger. Just a gentle rocking until she slipped into all-embracing sleep. In the first light of day, the telltale trickle that had run from between the small girl's thighs onto the pavement and into the gutter betrayed the fact that this was no sleeping child. The early morning beggar paused only briefly beside the limp body before shuffling past her on his way to his usual begging place.